911, what's your emergency? Everyone is outside.
On the morning of October 17, 1987, an emergency call came from a small town hidden deep within the Appalachian Mountains. The dispatcher answered immediately, but instead of panic, she was met with complete silence on the other end of the line. For nearly 20 seconds, nothing could be heard except a faint layer of static. Then the connection ended without explanation. By the time deputies reached the town known as Black Hollow, its streets were empty and every resident had disappeared. Hidden deep within the Appalachian Mountains was a town so small that many maps barely acknowledged its existence. Its name was Black Hollow. Life here was simple. Friendly neighbors, empty streets, and the sound of church bells every Sunday morning filled the valley. Beyond the last house, the forest began. Locals rarely crossed its edge after sunset, and no one liked explaining why. Somewhere beneath those hills rested an abandoned mine, officially closed years ago, but never truly forgotten. 3 days before everything changed, Daniel Mercer arrived in Black Hollow, searching for forgotten places and untold stories. Outside the town's general store, an elderly man watched Daniel with growing concern the moment he mentioned the old mine. The old man quietly said, "Some places stay buried for a reason." Then he walked away without another word. Daniel ignored the warning, but as he reached the forest, he couldn't escape the feeling that someone was watching him. Before sunrise, Daniel followed an overgrown trail that led deeper into the forest than anyone had advised him to go. Hidden beneath tangled vines stood an old warning sign, almost erased by time, but still impossible to ignore. Beyond the sign, the abandoned mine waited in complete silence. The broken entrance suggested someone had been there recently. Daniel lifted his camera and captured a single photograph, unaware it would become his first real piece of evidence. That evening, Daniel developed the film in his room, expecting ordinary photographs from another ordinary day. One image caught his attention. At first, everything looked exactly as he remembered, until he looked closer. Near the distant tree line stood a faint silhouette. Daniel was certain no one had been there. He looked outside into the empty street. Nothing moved, yet the feeling of being watched refused to disappear. The next morning, Daniel visited Black Hollow's small public library, hoping to learn more about the abandoned mine and its history. Most newspapers mentioned a mining accident decades earlier, but several editions appeared to be missing from the archive. When Daniel asked about the missing records, the librarian hesitated, then quietly said they had disappeared years ago. As Daniel prepared to leave, he noticed a faded map pinned to the wall, and one location had been marked by hand. Following the hand-drawn map, Daniel left the trail behind. Nearly an hour later, he reached a place that shouldn't have existed. Hidden beneath vines and towering trees stood an abandoned chapel, untouched, forgotten, and strangely silent. Inside, layers of dust covered every surface, except for a narrow path leading toward the old altar. Resting on the altar was a worn leather journal. The dust around it had been disturbed, as if someone had opened it only hours before. Daniel carefully opened the worn journal. The first few pages contained ordinary church records until the entries suddenly changed. Several names had been crossed out in dark ink. Beside each one was a single handwritten word, "Gone." The final completed entry described strange sounds beneath the mine, followed by unexplained disappearances that no official report ever mentioned. As Daniel reached the last page, he froze. The journal ended with a warning: "If you hear them calling, never answer." Before leaving the chapel, Daniel switched on his portable tape recorder. He wanted to capture the silence, just in case he had missed something. The room remained completely still. No voices, no footsteps, only the sound of the wind slipping through broken windows. Later that evening, Daniel replayed the recording. At first, everything sounded exactly as he remembered, until the final few seconds. Beneath the hiss of the tape, a faint whisper emerged. It was impossible to understand, but Daniel knew one thing for certain. Unable to ignore the recording, Daniel returned to the abandoned mine the following morning, determined to hear the sound for himself. The tunnel was silent until a faint echo drifted from somewhere deep inside. It was too distant to understand, yet impossible to ignore. Daniel stopped and listened. The sound came again, this time closer. It still wasn't clear enough to understand, but it no longer sounded like the wind. Then everything fell silent. Even the wind had stopped, leaving Daniel alone with a darkness that suddenly felt alive. Later that afternoon, Sheriff James Carter asked Daniel to meet him alone. There was something he had never included in the official reports. He admitted that strange disappearances had been reported for years, but every investigation ended the same way. No evidence, no answers. Then the sheriff placed an old photograph on the desk. It had been taken nearly 30 years earlier, at the entrance of the same abandoned mine. Daniel stared at the image. One face looked strangely familiar. It was the same distant figure he had noticed in his own photograph. The sheriff directed Daniel to a remote cabin outside town. Its owner had lived alone for decades, refusing to speak about Black Hollow. The old man finally agreed to speak, but only after Daniel promised never to return to the mine alone. He claimed the disappearances didn't begin in 1987. According to him, they had been happening for generations, always in complete silence. Before Daniel left, the old man whispered one final warning. If the town ever becomes completely quiet, don't wait. Leave immediately. That night, Black Hollow looked perfectly ordinary. Porch lights glowed, families gathered for dinner, and the streets remained calm. Then, without warning, every sound disappeared. The wind stopped. The insects fell silent. When the deputies arrived minutes later, every home remained open. Meals still rested on tables, but not a single person could be found. Black Hollow was never repopulated. The town still stands today, waiting in silence, just as it was found that night. 3 days after Daniel disappeared, a search team returned to the mine. They found no footprints, no signs of a struggle, only his camera. The film inside had survived. Most photographs showed familiar places until investigators reached the final frame. The last image showed the mine entrance exactly as expected, except for one impossible detail. Daniel had somehow photographed himself.
This photo doesn't align with the initial.
No one could explain who pressed the shutter, because Daniel had already vanished before the photograph was taken. Daniel Mercer was never found. His investigation officially ended, but the questions never did. Authorities sealed the mine and closed the case. Officially, Black Hollow became another unsolved mystery. Years later, investigators reviewed Daniel's final footage one last time and noticed something no one had reported before. As the recording ended, a distant figure slowly stepped into the frame behind Daniel. The camera cut to black before anyone could identify who or what it was. Some places are abandoned because people leave. Others, because something never does.